Well, I always wanted to do this, so this is my chance to do it. Holly, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so this was intended to be a panel. It looks like for now it's going to be a conversation between ourselves. And let's see how we progress. The reason why I wanted to have this panel as the in closing ceremony for Holly's Manifold show is that the gallery, OXH Gallery, it's actually intended to be a place of community and community where one can form very authentic connections through art, with art, but especially with the kind of people that have the same sort of engagement with art. And by being very authentic about these connections, art turns out to be, I don't know where to look, there or there. I feel like I'm looking at monitor. So I'm like between looking at the monitor and looking at her projections on there. But okay, I'm choosing to look up here, Holly. I'm not ignoring you, I'm looking at you. So again, back to Holly's show, the reason that I felt very happy and very grateful that she chose the gallery to premiere her work in Tampa is because through our conversations, we both have the same understanding of what the purpose of art is. And in her take of it, her artwork and her practice is actually a place of healing, not just a place where you have an aesthetic response to whatever that she's creating, but the place where she works through her own mental hurdles to make sure that her practice represents what she wants to say, but also that kind of artwork speaks to others as well. And both the choice of the topic, but also the choice of the panel members here is not random. It's precisely that all of us, both on a personal level, but also on a professional level, come through art as a stimuli for the brain by talking about it, by creating it, by having a response to it in such a way that art becomes effective, and I have to emphasize effective therapy. So Holly's here obviously as the wonderful artist represented by the gallery. Also, next to me is Angela Devlen. She's an entrepreneur, a yoga teacher, producer, and speaker. But most obviously, and for a lot of other reasons, she is the one who felt that by being creative and writing and publishing her own book, she felt that she could get the most in touch with her own true vulnerable self, and also, in a sense, get rid of, I don't know if that's the right word, but all the trauma that she's exposed through her line of work and maybe certain episodes in her own life. She felt that by being creative would be the best way to reach it. And obviously, to have theoretical perspective on our conversation is Alison Myers, who we have to say she left a very successful career as a corporate consultant with Fortune 500 companies such as Microsoft, Home Depot, and General Motors. Because of her own breakthrough to art therapy, she felt that this is the actual true way to find a space of healing both for herself and others as well. And if you guys want to say maybe a word or two about yourselves, you're more than welcome to do so.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I am Alison Myers, like she said. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a board certified art therapist. And I also have a side business as a dating coach. But I'm here obviously in my capacity as an art therapist. And so I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, of course.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for having me here. I'm Angela Devlen, and as Odeta had mentioned, I am the author of Grit and Grace, a book that really reflects my experiences in both personally and professionally and around the concept of resiliency and the journey towards resiliency that I believe we're all on at some level within our personal and professional paths. And I'm looking to share some of the stories of the people who have inspired the thinking around that tonight. Thank you for having me.
So yes, as promised, I did not invite everybody here just because I happen to like them, but we all come from different angles toward the same subject. And Holly, of course, this is all yours. This is your show. So if you could share a little bit both about yourself and your art practice, of course, but also the way that art helps you regulate your emotions in the sense. And then we can talk a little bit more about the show and the purpose of the show as well.
Sure. So I come to art making. I was originally from Miami, Florida, and I use art as a way to examine my emotions, to process, to reprocess trauma. And I use art as a way to turn what could be damaging emotions into something positive. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. We're just very attentively listening.
Okay, great. And I think that art is a conduit for me. It's that way of trying to take pain and transform that.
Right. And this is exactly, as we've spoken before, the point of the Manifold show, because, well, everybody here has seen the show. And while I was having these conversations with Holly about which is the best way to come about and what sort of work to include, besides all of it being very beautiful, so it's hard to choose from, we came up on the conclusion that the show should be a conversation between her earlier series of photographs when she took at a time of deep grief for herself. She lost her mother to alcoholism and domestic abuse. She took this series of photographs and never developed them. And then many years later, I would say maybe 15 years or so, right, Holly?
Yeah.
Right. She felt finally comfortable after having processed her feelings, obviously with the help of her art practice. She felt comfortable enough to switch into these very joyous, very colorful, very beautiful, large-scale art installations. And Manifold, the show at the OXH Gallery, is precisely this conversation between her period of deep grief as opposed to or speaking to Spiral Dance, her installation, which is the first piece when she felt finally at peace with herself to have processed the grief. And it's exactly the reason why the subject, I guess, of this panel is precisely creativity. What does it mean and how does that really truly help with getting back in touch with ourselves and especially becoming a place of healing. And well, we all have our personal stories, of course. But besides that, is it something that we should maybe have a conversation about, or is it something that we just want to contribute individually about that?
Also, can we ask questions of Holly?
Of course, yes.
So I have a clarifying question about particularly your show here, Holly. I understand the photographs and their reflection of your experience in grief. Was it after the loss of your mom? And was it or was it like during, like, I'm sorry, the question is that piece, I know you revealed it 15 years later, but were those photographs taken after the loss of your mom?
Yeah, they were taken probably about, I mean, I lost my mom when I was 15. The photographs were taken in my early 20s, and they reflect the notion of spirit body. And I think I was very aware of her presence, sort of not in a supernatural, hokey way, but more a sense of being enveloped, a sense that there was a very thin barrier between the living and the dead. And those photographs are very much testament to spirit, but they are a bit of they are darkness. There is an abyss. I wasn't outside of my grief yet. And I don't know that we ever stop grieving, but I think we evolve. And I think that we change in the way that we grieve about something. I think now I celebrate her life and I focus more on a sort of post-feminist kind of embracing of her strengths as opposed to grieving her absence. It's
I
really
love
not
that.
so, it's not so much about her now, it's about me claiming myself because I am now about the age, I'm just a little bit older than when she died, because she died at 47 and I'm 52. So I'm sort of embodying, I'm sort of, I'm sort of who she might have been had she lived and had she felt good about herself. I want to claim that for her.
I think one of the reasons that the reason I was asking the question is just to compare against my experience of being in the space where your work is shown, and there's this depth and dimension to the photographs. Yeah, and that, you're saying that it's not really like there's darkness, but that's feels, I feel the depth and dimension that is there. And then there's the vibrancy of the large piece that fills the gallery. And it's just, so what you just said, like, it just so resonates with my experience of your work. So thank you for offering the detail to such a direct question, because I just was my own personal curiosity about how that journey and everything that you just said is reflected in this beautiful expression of your work.
Thank you.
Well, as I said, we put some thought into which word to include, so I'm glad to hear that that did make an impression. So it looks like, Holly, you have been transforming both yourself and regulate your emotions through your art practice, right? Is there something more specific that you can share before Alison gives her professional take on it, her theory behind how the stimulus in the brain work?
Sure. And I actually work in the Department of Psychiatry at UCSF. And we have used art therapy in our a number of our programs, um, both on the inpatient service and in outpatient mental health. And I think overall, art therapy for me personally, art therapeutic approaches, it's really about understanding your life. And a lot of times you can't reach it in a cognitive way, but there's a way in which art reaches to a nonverbal, spiritual, like a heart center that actually reaches in and you're able to heal because you're able to reach that pain through the work. Now, I believe there is a place for traditional therapy and medication and all of that good stuff. But I think art therapy is really an important conduit. And it's, our clients love, having art supplies and being able to use those materials. So I'm a big fan of it, both as a treatment modality and also what I do personally as an artist.
Right. And as an artist myself, I have had more than enough occasions to think about what is art really about and what is creativity, however you choose to define it all about. Because I think I've mentioned to you, I have the kind of husband that when we go to an art show, he's going to look at the work and enough times he's gonna say, I could have made that. How hard is that? And knowing him, he could have done it enough times, but the point is he didn't. So this is we're trying to come to the heart of the conversation. What is it that certain people feel drawn to and feel that they can explore these hidden parts of themselves, and others just kind of think like, this that thing that if I have time, maybe I'll do it. Allison, is it maybe something you can add to this?
Yeah, I just want to say, Holly, it's so powerful. I really love the piece and what you were saying about the manifold being about like, the, claiming who you are now. So how many years was there difference between when you took the photographs and when you made that beautiful, colorful piece?
I want to say it was about 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's a lot of processing, right? Like, and I want to say, like, I'm sure you processed other ways too, not just through those pieces of art, and I think it's really cool that you work at UCSF in the psychiatric department. I used to live in San Francisco. I love it there. Yeah, so that's really cool. So I love what you're saying too about like the hidden part, like, being able to kind of access the pain in a different way, because that's what we find, in art therapy. And I think, science of art therapy is that when it comes to traumatic events and grief and very difficult, painful emotions, we can't express them through language. There's just not words to describe the feelings. And art gives us a way to get back in that part of the brain and express those emotions through a visual language, not a verbal language. If you think about it, all of us as kids, the first thing we do is play with art materials. We're using our visual system well before we're talking, so we all have a visual language. And when we use verbal language to talk about emotional pain, it's kind of like many layers separate from it in the brain, in the experience. Like you have to go through different brain systems, your prefrontal cortex and the language centers, to talk about emotional pain. But art, actually, because it is visual, can access the brain differently and get to like the amygdala and these parts of the brain that have more emotion in them. So art can access emotions more directly than language can. And I think that's why a lot of people have that experience of like, I can't express the pain, but when I paint this and when I do that, like I feel that I'm actually coming into contact with it in a way that processes it more and transforms it more internally.
I have a question. Is there a different modality of art that works better for certain types of, ones that you want to access? Or
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that clients will gravitate towards different art materials differently. When we're first working with somebody in art therapy, our training is to use highly structured art materials, which means pencil, marker, things that are like easy to control, and of course we're going to start with things that are not intimidating at all, because
Right.
The main thing I hear a lot of times with art therapy is I'll talk about art therapy and people say, I don't know how to draw.
Right.
I don't know how to make art. And there is no art skills necessary for art therapy at all. In fact, sometimes it's better off if you have no relationship to art, because then you're not trying to make something look a certain way or force a product. Art therapy is about the process of making art. It's a process oriented, modality. And even after the art is made, we continue to process with the art, so like, you made, that beautiful piece, Holly, so you could even continue, you could dialogue with it, you could interact with it, like you may even be able to wear it, you could, and you could do different things with it once it's there. It's claiming who you are, and it's making it concrete and making it visible and making it tangible in a way that you can interact with your identity. Like you can't do that unless you've made something tangible out of something abstract. Yeah.
And Holly, I know that your works are very time intensive, and I know that a lot of times you need to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to be able to engage with your artwork before the rest of the day. So what is it exactly, or if you're able to articulate that makes you precisely wake up at 3 o'clock and start drawing and filling in all those fields? Is it because you, as Alison says, are conversing with yourself, or is it something else that you want to, a message that you basically want to tell to other people?
Well, honestly, it's sort of a practical thing. So I used to do shift scheduling for residents at a medical ER at San Francisco General. And what I learned was that these folks would do, I would schedule them for the swing shift or the graveyard shift. And I learned that people can work all kinds of hours and that your day could actually be very long. And these people were working upwards of 80 hours a week. And I wanted to have a full-time art life, and I had a full-time day job. I still do. I still work at UCSF. And to get, 3, 4 hours of studio work per day, I had to get up at 2 a.m., and I still do, before my day job to get my studio time in, because I want to do a lot of artwork. I need to do a lot of it because granted, I think for all the artists out there, I want to encourage people, get in the studio, no matter how little time you have, get in there and do something because you'll feel better. But for me, I wanted to get big chunks in there. And the only time I could do that was from like 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. Is when because I needed I needed like a concentrated amount of time, because when I make my work, I feel peaceful. And you're right, my work is very labor intensive. And actually, if you look at a lot of folks that do art, like some clients, there's this sort of repetitive thing of making something, and it calms you. And that's what it does for me. It calms me. So yeah, I need to get in there. And if it means I got to get up at 2 a.m. because I have an 8-hour workday, that's what it's going to be. I am not going to give it up. So, and I've been doing this for over a decade this way.
I'm really impressed. That's amazing. I mean, your dedication and your motivation is amazing. Like, what is it that propels you, that makes you feel like you have to make art? Like, what is that?
I think one of the things I recognize is that as a woman artist, we're sort of known for blooming a little later. A lot of times we got to take care of a lot of stuff earlier in our life. And I think that in my earlier life, I doubted so much my voice and my vision. And I feel now at 52, and I would say that I kind of turned a corner in my early 40s. I had earned my MBA in finance, and I was kind of like, you know what? I can do math. I got my MFA in my early 20s, and then I did an MBA in my late 30s. And then I was just like, I want to be an artist. I want to be a full-time artist, and nothing is going to stop me, because I spent so much of my life doubting my vision, doubting my worth, not thinking I was good enough. And I think a lot of artists do that, a lot of women artists in particular. And I was like, forget that. I'm going to do this, and I don't care what my life looks like. I'm going to make this work. And I fortunately, UCSF is a great place to work. A lot of artists work at UCSF. It's a mission-driven organization. And folks kind of know that I'm a creative type, and I've felt very supported in the process.
Well, you seem to be the poster child for the power of art and art therapy, because it feels that it's one thing that you do it because you cannot not do it. And I guess another way to answer why would you engage with art, in my opinion, would be because it sort of allows you to be comfortable with uncertainty. And it sort of, at least in my case, it makes it okay not to look at the world through sort of a binary. This is good and this is bad. This is success and this is the way of being ineffective. This is healthy and this is unhealthy. Being them from like a very personal perspective, anxiety, depression, mental illnesses, all these things that seems to be today's malady, I guess. But also if you enlarge it to social limitations, by being creative, you sort of give yourself the freedom to look at things through an alternative perspective, I want to say. And this is, in my case, what makes me never give up being creative and working on art. Which, in another sense, makes one also very resilient into going deep into oneself and maybe probing into the human condition, but also be a little bit more okay with the way things turn out to be, as Holly was saying, that I don't really mind the way my life looks to others or even my own eyes, as long as I'm at peace with the process and what I am doing. And yes.
No, I'm thinking about Holly's comment about being a late bloomer. I didn't publish my book until I was 48. And I think I never thought of myself as being an artist. And even now, I wouldn't lead with that as the way that I would identify as someone who's an artist. But what I learned about artistic expression as maybe even a non-artist, earlier in my career, having spent 30 years in healthcare and disasters, I spent a lot of time with people who were experiencing the effects of extreme loss and trauma. And what I learned, particularly in the parts of the country or parts of the world where the countries that I worked in were primarily considered to be developing countries and rural areas of those parts of the world. And what I found was, particularly among the women groups that I worked with, is that artistic expression through music and dance was oftentimes the way in which they communicated and they gathered and healed. It was, we're wired for connection as humans. And again, to Holly's earlier point, right, that nervous system regulation, that, right, when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling the effects of loss and grief, our nervous systems become dysregulated. And that reveals itself for us in a whole host of ways in our bodies and our physical and mental health. So even if you don't see yourself as an artist at any stage of life, but again, as someone who identifies as someone who starts to, diving into this more and more at the second half of life, but I think it's available to everyone. It's not, there's some that, yes, are naturally gifted and called to do this as their work. And then there's others like myself that do it as a way of self-expression and healing, in part because it was modeled by these extraordinary communities of women who used it as a way to recover from some of the most extraordinary losses I had seen people have to navigate and overcome. And it really became at the root of my thinking around how we begin to heal and develop resilience.
So yes, I did say nobody was at random. Everybody did have a proper take on the topic. So, Alison, what is it that maybe you can add from a more theoretical perspective? Because we're all sharing that we are painting or writing or creating because it's deep-seated necessity to do it. Is there a more theoretical approach to this or something that we can maybe add to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to experience your emotions and pay attention to them and express them. I think a lot of people don't do that at all, and they're super suppressed, and they suffer for it a lot in a lot of different ways. So maybe for some people it's making art or writing, creating community, you were talking about. But I think it's really imperative that people, try to experience their range of emotions. Emotions are not bad. They are a biological, evolutionary mechanism that helps us survive and gives us messages about the world. I think in our world, we tend to look at emotions as kind of a pain in the butt. And just want to say, I think they're great, and to spend the time looking at them and processing them is very, very important. It can be very freeing and liberating, but I wanted to say about the art materials thing,
Right.
too, is that there's not a particular, it's not like, oh, PTSD, you should be working with paint. ADHD, you should be working with pencil. It's not like that, different people like different art materials better. The more controlled and structured the art material is, the better it is for people whose emotions feel out of control and feel dysregulated. And then over time, as they express the emotion, they can then move to more looser, wetter art materials. So it's kind of the way we move them into feeling more in control and processing emotions.
Holly, do you find this to be the case in your own art practice? Because the way I picture is you're sort of meditating while you're like filling in all these little tiny squares, like endlessly coloring in, and I'm sure you sort of go into a certain mind space when you're doing all this.
Well, so it's really interesting because in the last year, I worked with several nonprofits, Ogden Contemporary Arts and Maui Arts and Cultural Center, and we did workshops with community-based organizations. And what I found, I brought a bunch of art supplies, and I had led these workshops with women and at-risk youth. Um, and what I found is I brought fabric because you probably know about the fiber-based component of my practice. People really resonated with fabric and glue, and they really resonated with shiny things. I actually used parts of like components of my sculpture where I had this iridescent cellophane for some of my sculptures that are very, very large. And I gave them sections of that sculpture to include in their collages. And people loved collage. People really, really dug collage because it was kind of like, some of them really wanted to draw. I mean, and drawing is my first love because that's kind of, I went to arts magnet schools, New World School of the Arts in Miami when I was growing up, which had a heavily drawing-based focus. But for a lot of folks that have never accessed art making, collage is a great doorway because you got some glue, you got a scissors, and I brought the fabric, and folks love that. I mean, bottom line, they just love making beautiful things, and it made people happy. It was just I don't know. I find that those modalities where you can just put stuff together and be very free, it really loosens people up pretty. I mean, the first like 20 minutes, people are like super uptight. And then they kind of like I made them do like 3 or 4 exercises, and I was like, you got to blow up that perfection. Just let it go. And people, almost everybody just chilled, like after like exercise 3, people
froze, I guess. So you just wait.
I'm not sure.
Is it on our end or our end?
I doubt it. It seems like her end.
On her end? Well, while she's trying to unfreeze, as Holly was saying, that people have this first initial response to like, okay, this is not for me, and once they let go, they truly and fully connect with themselves. And reading your book, as I was mentioning to Allison, I did get a sense of, I don't know if I did it wrongly, but of having met the real you as opposed to having conversations. Is it something that you intentionally wanted to put on the book, or is something that you just had to let out?
Well, when I was writing the book, I wasn't necessarily planning on publishing a book, right? It was sort of this idea, right? The writing became a form of catharsis in some way. And honestly, a lot of what I was writing that ended up in the book, even once I got to the idea that, okay, I'm going to actually publish a book, a lot of the things that I wrote, I didn't think were going to end up being in the book because of the rawness and and it was so much more personal. And I thought there's going to be this terrible vulnerability hangover when this finally hits the bookshelves. And I had a healthcare consulting practice that, where I was a CEO and advised, boards and hospital leaders, right? So there's this idea of like, these people are going to read this and go, oh my gosh, like this is a different person. And I mean, I'm pretty authentic in every area of my life. That yes, there's a different persona. The version of Angela hitchhiking and cussing doesn't really fly in the boardroom, but that's how I start the book, right? Is this experience of me at 19 hitchhiking to New York City, and then I share a lot of personal and professional essays that articulate why I believed what I believed around resiliency. And it wasn't to say, here's what I know, but rather to say, here is what I believe I have learned and I'm continuing to practice with in my life. Keep the parts that resonate with you and discard the rest, right? I'm not a professional therapist. I have been witness to and have worked with in long-term recovery and disaster zones, yes, but my professional expertise isn't from a clinician or therapist or psychiatrist perspective. So it ended up being much more personal than I thought, but that is ultimately what resonated with people. They felt, particularly coming out of COVID, the guidance I was given is that it would the real, authentic stories of recovery would resonate with people who felt like they were beginning to reconnect with themselves and society and potentially for many people rebuilding their lives after the experiences and losses of COVID. So I wanted to share what I learned in the hope that others would gain from it. So that rawness ended up being by design. And you're not probably the only one who was shocked by that.
But my pressure, I was not shocked. I felt honored in a sense to be able, as a reader, somebody who's not necessarily a friend who knows, that this person is willing to be this open and this raw with no ulterior motive, but just to basically, this is something I feel and I have this need to let it out and let it go. And this is how I face it. That's how I read it from outsider's perspective.
I appreciate that. Thank you. What I think it has done, even with among my clients, so again, the audience that I thought was going to read this book and think, oh, wow, we've been working with this, wild and free spirit that we didn't quite know in this way and now do. And I've been astounded that people I never even thought would be interested in reading the book are, and I've, just to be frank, like a 60-year-old male is not who I wrote the book for, and yet he's one of my clients and greatest champions, and he gifts it to his staff, and they send me pictures of them reading on the plane to a business meeting kind of thing, and these unexpected, wonderful moments of having shared that part of myself that I didn't think that would be received by people who know me differently, and the invitation to all of you, and what I gained from that is that, and I'm not talking from a place of oversharing. Some people might think my book is oversharing, but I'm not saying like suddenly you don't have to necessarily open yourself up 110%. But when we truly, show up fully and lead with that authenticity, it can transform the relationships and the way in which you connect with people. And that, again, back to what I was saying before, we're wired for connection. And that's such an instrumental piece, I think, to our sense of community and our ability to heal as individuals, as families, as communities, and as organizations.
This is definitely the impression I got from reading the book. And to circle it back to you, Alison, because while we're having our conversation, you did mention, and I do agree, that art therapy or engaging with art in some capacity, it helps for very authentic connections, both by knowing yourself better, and by knowing yourself better, you kind of know who is the right person for you, what kind of environment is the one that you're going to thrive. In your experience working with different settings, I guess, in art therapies, would maybe be creating on your own or co-creating with other people be a different experience and have different results, or that would basically be the same?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a different experience. I worked with juvenile homes at Tampa General Hospital with traumatic brain injury. I worked with Alzheimer's, dementia patients. I worked in so many settings. I worked with special needs kids. And I've done a lot of individual art therapy work in my private practice. And honestly, I really believe that co-creating art may be the most powerful modality. Like, to me, group art therapy is like amazing. So imagine like I'm working one-on-one with a teenager and they're coming into my office, and a lot of therapy for a teenager is normalizing and validating their experience. Like, yes, other people feel like that too, and stuff like that. That's a lot of what's happening. Well, if you're in a group and there's like 8 other teenagers and they're sharing their experience, I don't have to say that. It's way more powerful hearing another teenager saying those things and having that common experience. and when you're making art, we have all these defense mechanisms that we use, right, to kind of defend our ego, right? Like we will justify things and rationalize things and compartmentalize things and minimize things. And, we're always in this conversation in our head trying to kind of protect ourselves and keep ourselves looking good to ourselves. But when you are making art, you don't have access to those defense mechanisms anymore. You can't justify in art, making art. You're not rationalizing your experience. You're just making the art. So I think it has a way of kind of going around all of these, kind of ego defense mechanisms that we typically would use in language, so that when you're co-creating art with people, there is a little bit more of an authenticity. There's more of an authentic expression. At the end, when we'd be done making art, we would always say, if you want to share what you made and talk about it, then that would be great. And most everybody does. And that turns out to be like a really meaningful part of the art therapy process, is sharing and processing the art together.
So I have a question about the co-creating, only totally personal experience. But so last night, actually, I was with a friend of mine who, and I've never done painting. And again, so for me, artist is more just kind of this individual self-expression. Writing is one of the ways in which I do it more specifically. But for me, like painting, for example, is not something I traditionally do. And a friend of mine has been over the last few years experimenting with painting. And he said, "Oh, come on over to my house and we'll and paint together." I never ever had considered it to be something you could do with someone, other than maybe like the idea of the collages that Holly was referencing, where you're in a setting and it's designed, or the art therapy that you provide. But what are your thoughts about two friends, like, in my case, which is like, let's just get together and paint together. Let's just get some we use oil paint and a couple of canvases, and we painted. Now he's a much more skilled painter. For me, I don't know what I'm doing. So this is also another opportunity to be like, okay, let me try this out. But does it have some of the same therapeutic effects? Because we've talked about it, but it's really just much more as two people who are with curiosity about it.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds fun. I love that. That sounds like a fun Friday night, making art with your friends. I've been recently making some art with one of my friends and have had a great time too. And, art making itself is therapeutic, right? Like you don't have to do art therapy with an art therapist in order for the art making to be therapeutic. Like it is, I think, in and of itself therapeutic. Obviously, if you have a trained professional there who's guiding you, maybe that would be maximizing the therapeutic potential. Typically when we think about therapy, we're thinking about mental health issues, anxiety, depression, mood disorders, things like that. So when I'm working with people, we have mental health treatment goals. Obviously when you're making art with your friend and there's not like a mental health component, you don't have treatment goals that you're working towards. You're just enjoying co-creating and connecting, I think, and having fun.
So this thing will basically be the same, because obviously it's not the same if you go to one of those sip and paint events, because you just go to get buzzed and have fun. But in their case, for example, and she had done a post and so captured, explained everything that she's saying right now. It was a meaningful experience. It was not just like, oh, cool, this is a red. She had this realization that through colors you can access your emotions. So I don't know if it was a way to maximize her engagement, the same way that you could have done in a therapy session, but the difference between doing it on your own with intention, I'm guessing, and going to a therapist to basically do the same thing. Would the difference be that in her case there's no set goal, and in your case you start with a goal in mind?
Yeah, there's definitely a goal involved with any good mental health treatment should have some goals identified. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a question? Yeah.
How do you lead in your art therapy? How do you lead a client to make their art? Or what's the steps?
She asked, how do you lead a client in art therapy? Like, what are the steps? And it depends, so it's not like a one size fits all, like first we do this, and second we do this, and third we do this. Art therapy is really vast, and it could look different. I could have 10 different art therapy clients, and it could be totally different. Like in one day, I'll be like doing stop motion animation, and then we're doing sculpture, and then we're doing collage, and then we're doing, drawing on painting our faces. You know what I mean? It can be anything. Anything could be an art material. We could smash stuff. We could find leaves. We could make things out of twigs. So it's really varied. And I try to use materials that speak to the clients. I listen for their metaphors and the way that they talk about things. And try to work with the metaphors that they use. But first, it usually starts with something like, this is about the process. It's not about the product. So, to not have to feel intimidated by the art making process, because usually what happens to American children is somewhere around the age of 9, 10, or 11, they're graded on their art. And then after that, there's good and bad art. And they're not good at it. And then people don't want to make art anymore. So it's really sad that we do that to kids in America, instead of just having art being like a normal part of being a human being. All our ancestors made art. This is part of being, being human in our humanity. And I think, just like Holly's piece, which she was reclaiming her identity, she was, in a sense, kind of like rehumanizing herself, being fully human. So I think playing with materials and exploring materials and making art, I think is something that more people should do. Absolutely.
So Holly, I think a good follow-up question would be, I know that you have progressed in the way you use materials in your work. Is there a practical reason of why you have switched up materials, or is it because certain materials feel that respond better to whatever's going on with you?
There was a long time where as an artist, I felt like I had to pick a lane, like I'm a painter, or no, I'm an installation artist or whatever. And I realized that I didn't want to pick a lane. As I got older, I realized I wanted to do it all. So I have a collage and painting practice. And if you go on my website, you'll see I have this sort of 2D thing going on with these shaped works on aluminum. And then I do these large fiber pieces because there's something about making a 30-foot fiber sculpture that is so satisfying. I mean, to make something that is so big, because as a woman, the whole culture is around our smallness, our infantilizing, our objectification. So I want to make things that are huge. I want to fill up space. I want to defy the boxes that women are in. I want to defy the concept of gender. And this whole, I'm much more in the notion of gender fluid. And then I'm really, I did a video practice in my undergraduate work, so I'm starting to reincorporate video. I'm starting to collaborate with poets so that I'm starting to project on fabric. And then, I also do these drawing installations because I love to draw with a passion. And, I draw on paper. I don't want to, I am all those things. And I think I'm at a stage in my life where I don't want to be defined by any one box. I want to be boundless.
Right.
I love that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how I don't. I love that so much. That's what I want for everybody. I've been told my whole life, they pick a thing, do it well, do the thing, and it's like that's never resonated for me. And it's I think a gift that we can carry forward to others that feel more either because they're getting the same messaging as young people, or just anyone at any stage in their life where they're feeling held back by that freedom, that full self-expression, which is why I think the conversation around art and the point you made is so important, is we don't have to be good at it to be able to have this artistic expression, to be able to, right? Like I mean, I've never done anything with pottery. I love pottery. I've never done anything with it. I left the show the night that your opening was here, Holly, and I went downstairs, and like just down the street is a place where you can like pay to make pottery. I'm like, I'm gonna do this. I mean, like suddenly I'm a pottery. I mean, like this has nothing to do with anything about me or my life, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm so inspired, right? So like the power of Holly's art. 100%. That's the thing. So we also find these beautiful things, other people's artistic expression as a form of inspiration. But also that the premise of what inspires you is this idea that I'm boundless, that I have this, all these infinite ways of expressing ourselves artistically. It just seems absolutely wonderful and resonates so deeply with me. I feel like someone had their hand up that we didn't see or didn't get to call on.
I had a question. I had a question for Alison with respect to therapy. You had mentioned about mental health goals. You had also mentioned TBI, so neurological type goals. So I was wondering about OT type situations where you're working with people to work on fine motor skills or other things, and how you bring different modalities into that.
She asked about how we would bring in occupational therapy type interventions into the art therapy modality. Is that okay? It's interesting because as an art therapist, it's outside of my scope of work to say like make a handheld paint brush that's ergonomic for someone who has an impairment in their hand. That is the scope of work of occupational therapy. So when I was working at Tampa General Hospital in the Traumatic Brain Injury Center, I worked closely with the occupational therapists to make instruments and to make art making, ability for some of the people that needed it, there. And it was amazing. I have a great story about this woman. She had a traumatic brain injury and she was completely nonverbal, and she had a hard time moving. And, she was able to kind of point in a little bit like gesture, and art therapy, we call it the third hand. So I was her third hand in that I made her art for her. I showed her the pictures and gave her different, options for things, and she would pick the thing, and I would kind of cut it out, and she would kind of go, and this and that, what she didn't like, and we made a beautiful collage, and it was so meaningful because her parents came in, and she was so proud of that piece, and they cried, and her parents said, "We know she's still in there. Thank you." Yeah.
So yeah, I guess this comes right back to the reason why I started the Osage Gallery, and I also chose Holly as the artist to make the gallery her home away from home to premiere work in Tampa. Because I feel that although there are all these trendy and also helpful and meaningful ways of paradigms of looking at art through maybe a social perspective or race perspective or a gender perspective and whatnot, and they're all needed and present in the way people look at art. In my opinion, art should be truly deep down about exactly as you were saying, things that you can really put a word on. You just don't have the language to express those kind of emotions. But by engaging with the art, you feel that maybe you're not able to vocalize it, but you know that you're feeling whatever it is that you're feeling. And oftentimes people find it soothing, and other times less so. But there's definitely a very genuine, very humane reaction versus those cookie cuts. This is about this and stands for that. And I feel that all this work very much, at least for people who saw it in person here in the gallery, they all have a strong response. Nobody just said, "Oh, cool," and left. They all took their time and they appear to be thinking deep thoughts. I don't know what they're thinking, but they all have this like very attentive looks. And I everybody afterward did send a text saying that this work is amazing, and I'm sure they're amazing for different reasons. They will answering, I guess, different calls within themselves. And this goes back to how resilient one can be, maybe through art as well. One of the functions of art is to be resilience and to sort of probe into that human condition. What is it that it truly needs? And oftentimes you don't vocalize, or oftentimes maybe you're clear about it within yourself, but you feel like, in her case, or the way I saw it at the beginning, like you have to be this like cool top person in charge, or you just feel that it's not a fake person, it's just this kind of person that I want to appear in your eyes, but deep down I'm something more or something different. And through being creative in one way or another, you kind of give yourself the freedom to truly engage with your deep humanity. And this is why, if I have to ask you another question, is because of your travels and being pretty much everywhere, and also your line of work, you have been in sort of touch with a lot of people in their hardest moments. Is it a way maybe through your own witnessing them or something that they have done that you would say that yes, it's their humanity, their creativity that sort of saved them from these traumas?
Well, I think that the way in which when people use different forms of artistic expression, it's oftentimes a way of connecting with the parts of ourselves that you said before. It's hard to put words to. And the post that you're referencing from today, for example, an early introduction of that for me was when I was working with the women in Haiti after the earthquake. They'd already, prior to the earthquake, had experienced years of loss and trauma and experiences before the earthquake and then following the earthquake in the tent cities of sexual assault. So there was a cross section of very deep traumas that they were experiencing, and then they're with me, a woman who is not Haitian and not local to the community, and still allowed me into that very deep and raw and intimate space. And the way in which I was welcomed into that was through the form of using art and writing and dance and music to teach these women, about their human rights, but also to celebrate the strength of them as a group of women in community. And so there's the first, I think, the idea that there's a sense of connection around for all of them, in that there's a shared humanity in the cross section of losses that they had experienced, and each of their stories was different. Some of them verbalized those stories, and some of those stories to this day will still bring me to tears when I'm alone, or even when I'm sharing it with a group like this. And then there's other times when they didn't share those stories, but yet they still allowed for me to join in with them and sing and dance while they were, starting to actively create the possibility of a future for themselves, even though they were facing all of these experiences in that moment and knowing the burdens they were going to carry as they move forward. But there was tremendous healing there. It was later used to apply to things like setting up sewing cooperatives so that women's, menstrual and gynecological health could be cared for. There's, all kinds of things that they were able to continue to build on as a result of finding ways to express their pathway towards recovery, emotionally, economically, functionally, right? There's you talk about occupational therapy. We didn't have the same level of medical care and resources in the field, but still, after an earthquake, there was a lot of folks that experienced physical injuries that they were recovering from. So being able to do things in adaptive ways, and that inclusion and that love and that expression and all these different ways became a huge part of the healing for them. And that was where I started to realize that it wasn't just about the gift of being an artist, but rather the art being the gift. And then moving forward from there.
That is a great way of putting it. And Holly, you have also spoken about how your art serves as a healing space for yourself, of course, but also for the people who engage with your art, as Angela was saying. So is there something more that maybe you can share with us?
When I think about healing space, a lot of that is in the context of the installations because some of them are quite large, and Mending Body, Mending Mind, which was a fiber and video-based installation, definitely was an environment where people could sort of process trauma in that way, because these things are very much about surrounding people with that experience. It's very much about being in the center of these spaces. So yeah, I make large work for that reason.
Right. And the space you were showing your work is kind of smallish. So your piece already being large makes an immediate impact. And everybody just enters the space and it's like, whoa. And they do have a moment of, okay, this is, I can pause basically and just take in all the color without having to think about it or what sort of response is expected of me. It's just experiencing the work.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how the work would just totally be like, totally surround sound.
Well, because usually your work is shown in all these huge spaces. So we took this as an opportunity to have a different way of setting it up and sort of looking at how audiences are experiencing in a completely different way of showing. Which again circles us back to all these questions, I guess, or points that were raised both with Alison and Angela about how different people have different experiences and different materials sort of arise different emotions when you engage with. Well, I had all my questions answered, so if there's anything at all that you want to add, I guess everybody's welcome. Is there anything, Holly, that you'd like for us to know more about maybe your process or your work or your future plans or whatever it is that you want to share with us?
I was just super inspired. Listening to the ways in which art therapy is an intervention in, especially in spaces where you're working with a population that are not the same people, like they're people of color. I'm super aware when I'm a white woman entering a space where people have a very different lived experience than me. And I'm an artist, I'm not a trained art therapist, so I try to partner with clinical, in some of the trainings, or not trainings, but workshops I want to do in the future. I really want to work with, partner with social workers or other mental health professionals so that when we make art and dialogue about, what participants are making, we can do this in a safe space. And there are mental health providers there to, help people process if there are strong emotions that come up. So those are some of the things that I'm moving forward in my own sort of process of. I see my workshops as a form of direct action, because if I'm saying that my artwork is about healing, then I need to also be about service. I'm really interested in coupling, providing food, providing ways in which people can access a workshop for free. All of these ways in which I can be in the community and be a part of that. So, yeah, that's my journey.
I think the piece about the mental health piece, Nelson, I'm curious more about what your thoughts are, and then anyone here that's in the room that has thoughts or questions. But mental health is, for a whole cross section of reasons, a really important part of our needs in our communities now, and part of our overall health that I think has been overlooked for a long time. So I'm encouraged by that. I have been more aware of it more through my work from disasters. Again, with trauma, you expect that there's going to be a need with regards to mental health. But what it taught me is after Hurricane Sandy, for example, the cross section, again, you wouldn't think that between trauma and disasters, there would be this cross-section with mental health and art, but there is. And so there was a gallery, Hurricane Sandy impacted New York City and other parts of the Northeast several years ago, and a gallery in Red Hook, one of the most significant communities in Brooklyn that was damaged, opened the gallery so that we could do our production. We were producing sort of a documentary with interviews with survivors in their experience in Red Hook. But what we realized is that that might be also an experience where people might be either triggered, or the impacts with regards to their health might start to reveal itself in those interviews and conversations. So the gallery we had this physical space where the interviews were being done. There was the art, there was a place where people could express themselves artistically on one wall that was dedicated to the community, not to artists that were being displayed, where their work was being displayed. It was dedicated to the community, so they're able, through words and imagery, able to express their experience and then meet with us. And then there was a variety of other resources that were available. So why do I share this? In that it became a safe entry point for people to also access mental health services. So we made sure that we were partnered with other resources so that as soon as a need was identified in some way through these interviews, either through observation or their request, we immediately had places where we could refer them to. And we have professionals on site as well as other agencies and resources to refer out to that were culturally aligned, that aligned with their language needs, that aligned with, however they expressed themselves, and really felt like they needed something that was connected uniquely to their unique cross-section of needs. So it wasn't even a one-size-fits-all to what the mental health services that were provided. So I say all of that to say I think art also can be a safe place of entry to access mental health in particularly homes, communities, or other ways in which there's still some stigma tied to that for them. And it was really quite powerful and just an experience that just builds on your emphasis around the need for mental health. Alison, what are your thoughts on that?
On the needs for mental health?
Well, not so more so about art, and even in a non-clinical setting becoming an entry or a point of entry for access to more formal treatment and care.
Sure. I mean, I can see that happening, especially, just because it does stir up, the inner world and thoughts. I mean, depending on what you're doing. A lot of the hospitals in the area, like the Moffitt Cancer Center, actually have art studios in them. So when a patient is, struggling, they can go down and actually make art in the hospital. There's a studio available for them. So I think that's great. I just want to mention too, as far as there's a lot of work with art therapy going on in the military. And I think it's kind of interesting to take note of that, because usually, certainly when people call my private practice and are interested in art therapy, I would say 9 out of 10 times it's children. Like people, think of art therapy like, oh, I'm going to have my kid go to art therapy. But I want to say that for adults, it's great. And even men, because, a lot of combat veterans are doing some pretty powerful art therapy stuff with PTSD at the VAs around the United States.
Yes, I think I did mention to myself being a recent transplant to Florida, so the military life was very much out of my mind at all times. Mm-hmm. My neighbor happens to be a veteran, and he is actually making art, producing art as part of his transitioning out of the Army. It's actually a requirement at this point for them to access their emotions through art as well, which is actually a good way of circling around with everything that all saying, that you don't have to just do art if you happen to love art, but look at it from also the perspective of, okay, that's the entry point into more other things that you feel that are more necessary or more immediate needs. Because I would say most people, besides the ones who are here, because we already love art, so art is our language to start with. But for people coming from a different way of life, art is sort of like, well, that thing that kids do, as we say, or that thing that you do when you have everything else going great for you. You have the time, you have the money, and what else can you do? And I think this is the sort of wrong perspective that panels like this or galleries that shows like this are the ones that can actually change that way of looking at art.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people journal every day as part of like mental health hygiene, right? Like there's, emotional hygiene, just like there's sleep hygiene and personal hygiene.
We have one person here.
Right, so you want to like be kind of checking in with yourself and taking care of your mental health on a daily basis. And I think a powerful way to do that is actually art journaling. If you've never heard about it, you can find probably millions of videos on YouTube about art journaling, but it's just like making a little art piece every day, with an intention, and can be really helpful. And, art making doesn't just have to be for people who are having mental health issues. I think it can boost the mood and make life feel more meaningful and connected for people who are well as well. So
Yeah, also someone who writes, I journal daily as well. I think it's an incredible way, whether it's through, writing or artistic, all of it, like, right, so sketching, well, I know I have another friend where everything that she journals is all through imagery. And there's like a word maybe here and there, but for the most part, it's the storytelling through imagery in her journals. And it's beautiful to look at. And then, much like my friend last night that I was with last night, I was talking about doing the painting with. It also, he is a combat veteran and has been out of the service for a number of years now. But that, I think, art has been a big part of his healing and recovery from his experiences during his years of service overseas. So I think that I would highly recommend it. He continues to gain a lot of value from it just for that reason alone, aside from his general love of painting.
I would just kind of I would just jump in and say that there's an expression, and I don't know how common it is, that every door is the right door. And I think about that as art as sort of a linkage to other types of services. And that's the way I think about it.
So I guess we're all agreeing that art is great and can do great things.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps integrate the different parts of your brain. Different parts of your brain will communicate when you're making art. So I think it's really, really powerful. And you don't have to look a certain way, just play, engage with the materials. That's it.
I guess part of the problem, if you call it a problem, is that most people are so attuned to having to be a certain way and having to follow a certain guideline. There's precisely this sense of freedom that just do whatever you want. This lack of guideposts, I think is what scares a lot of people.
Yeah, they're not used to giving themselves permission to just go wild, let it loose. Make a giant art piece and put it in a little room. I love it.
And have a great show about it.
Yeah.
Right, so, Holly, I think this is all on our end, unless it's something else that you want to add.
No, thanks so much for everything tonight. Really grateful.
Of course. And as I keep telling everybody, I am very grateful and very happy that you did trust your work to the gallery. And everybody kept telling me, how did you make that happen? And I said, well, just by doing myself and just talking to Holly, and we sort of have the same way of looking at life and at things and accomplishing things. So that's how I made that happen, through art.
Yes. Any other questions out there?
Thank you, Holly. Well, I guess no questions. We figured out the world problems. We're done.
Everybody make art and peace and love. Yes, you have a question?
I was just wondering about the whole art. If I were to do that, I know there is like a certain way things that we pointed out, but I always think about the aesthetics of like how am I going to organize my feelings or thoughts, and how do I express that visually? I have tried a few times on my own by integrating certain aspects of what I lean onto my mind onto the paper, but I don't know how one truly like goes wild or goes off handle and, you know, as an artist, just be so rigid in trying to be aesthetically easy, even when you have emotions to pour onto. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say try to make something really ugly.
Yeah.
Try to make some really ugly stuff.
Yeah,
You know?
that's true.
See how it looks.
Yeah.
You know, try using materials you can't control. You know, yeah. There's no right or wrong. You know, assemble something and then rip it up, and then reassemble it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes that's part of the process. Destruction too.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about me is that I tried a couple times and turned into
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, that's up to you to give yourself permission, to not have to know how it's going to go and just be in the present moment and just what feels right. Even if it feels angry, maybe that's the feeling that wants to express itself within you.
One of the things my friend said to me last night was he began to realize as he was painting is different colors evoked different emotions. So sometimes we lead with the emotion. We know what we're feeling, and then we're looking for a way to express it. And then other times we start working with a modality or a texture or a color, and then it connects us with emotion that might otherwise have been locked in there that we didn't have access to before. So it might be that on different days, you're led to the creative expression in a different way. You might already know how you're feeling. See if there's thinking about collage earlier, is there texture? Is there some kind of, texture that you can use and create a collage with? Is there something about that texture that evokes a feeling in you that you're seeking? Or again, if you already know what the emotion is, then is there a color? Like it just literally what might be in your journal that day is the blob of blue, right?
That's sad.
And right, exactly, right. I mean, it's like for him, it's like connecting emotion. Like as a yoga teacher, I often say we're looking to connect breath with movement, right? And I can get into a whole mental health piece around the yoga and trauma informed yoga, but the same thing in my mind around art, right? It's like is there a way to connect texture with feeling, color with feeling, right? It's not about doing it right, but is this some visual expression of where I am in this moment today?
Yeah.
And then maybe later the collection of all of those pages become a collage later, right? That's a representation of your journey through that month. And it might end up being something completely unexpected and beautiful, or integrated with other modalities or artistic expressions, depending on what calls to you.
Yeah, somebody right now I got the built-in journal app on my phone with an iOS update.
I will tell you something. One of the expressions I use a lot in disaster management, because the idea is that everything that we do matters because it's lives on the line. The expression is this: if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. So if journaling is a place that's allowing for you to connect with what you need in this moment, that's what's working for you, right? So if you think of it in that way, perhaps that's the right answer for you now.
Try making art with your non-dominant hand too.
Oh, that's good.
Scribbling, blindfolded, moving your body wildly. Yeah.
I'll just fling the pencil around.
Mhm.
Hit papers and
Yeah. Exactly. There you go. See what happens.
This is another art show in the baking right here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much, guys, for being here and,
Thank you for
and
having
sharing
us.
your thoughts of us and everybody else. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Holly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to.
Now you ask the real questions.
Yeah. Hi.